The frozen December air bit through Hannah Abbott's cloak as the stagecoach lurched violently over yet another rut in the snow-covered mountain road. And in that moment before the door flew open and she felt herself tumbling through empty space toward the white expanse below, she wondered if this was how her story would end. The morning had started innocently enough back in Salt Lake City 3 days prior, when Hannah had boarded the northbound stage with dreams of reaching Bannack, Montana before Christmas of 1875. At 22 years old, she had finally saved enough money working as a seamstress to make the journey west to her uncle's mining claim, where he had promised her a fresh start and a partnership in his modest but profitable operation. Her Uncle Richard had written that Bannack was quieter now than during its gold rush heyday of the early 60s, but there were still opportunities for those willing to work hard and brave the harsh winters. The other passengers had been pleasant company at first. There was Mrs. Carmichael, an elderly widow returning to her son's ranch after visiting family in the city, and Mr. Burgeon, a heavy-set merchant transporting goods to the mining communities scattered throughout the Montana Territory. They had shared stories and hardtack biscuits as the stage rolled through the snowy wilderness, pulled by 6 sturdy horses that seemed tireless in their determination to reach their destination. But then the weather had turned savage on the 3rd day. The wind howled like wounded animals through the mountain passes, and snow fell so thickly that Hannah could barely see the trail ahead through the small window. The driver, a grizzled man named Fletcher, had assured them that he had made this run 100 times and could navigate it blindfolded. His confidence had been reassuring until the moment when something spooked the horses. Hannah never saw what caused the team to bolt. One moment they were maintaining their steady pace despite the storm, and the next the entire coach was careening wildly down the mountain road. Mrs. Carmichael screamed. Mr. Burgeon grabbed for the hanging straps, and Hannah braced herself against the wooden seat as the world became a violent blur of motion and sound. The driver's shouts were nearly lost in the wind, and through the window, Hannah could see him sawing desperately at the reins, trying to regain control of the panicked animals. The coach hit something, a boulder perhaps, hidden beneath the snow, and the impact sent Hannah sliding across the seat toward the door. Her shoulder struck the handle with enough force to unlatch it, and suddenly there was nothing but cold air and falling snow where solid wood had been. She scrabbled for purchase, her gloved hands finding nothing but empty space as momentum carried her through the opening. The fall seemed to last forever and no time at all. Hannah had one clear thought as she tumbled through the air. At least the snow might cushion her landing. Then she struck the ground, and the world exploded into white pain before fading to black. Preston Lawson had been checking his trap line when he heard the commotion from the road above. At 26, he had spent the last 8 years working various jobs throughout the Montana Territory, from ranch hand to deputy sheriff to his current occupation as a fur trapper and sometime guide. He knew these mountains as well as any man alive, and he knew immediately that the sounds echoing through the trees meant trouble. He was already swinging into his saddle when he caught sight of the runaway stagecoach careening along the ridge road. His bay gelding, a sure-footed mountain horse named Copper, responded instantly to his urging, carrying them up through the snow-laden pines toward the sound of disaster. Preston's heart hammered as he pushed through the drifts, knowing that a runaway coach in these conditions could mean death for everyone aboard. That was when he saw her fall. The dark figure tumbled from the coach like a rag doll, arcing through the falling snow before disappearing into a drift perhaps 30 yards down the slope from the road. Preston did not hesitate. He turned Copper down the mountainside, trusting the gelding to find his footing on the treacherous terrain, and made straight for the spot where the person had landed. By the time he reached the drift, the stagecoach had vanished around a bend in the road, still careening out of control. Preston knew he should probably try to help whoever else was aboard, but the figure in the snow was right here, right now, and might be dying. He dismounted in a fluid motion, his boots sinking deep into the powder as he hurried to where he could see dark fabric against the white. He dug through the snow with his gloved hands, uncovering first a cloak, then a woman's shoulder, then her face. She was young and pale as death, her lips already taking on a bluish tinge, and for a terrible moment Preston thought he was too late. Then she drew in a shuddering breath, and he felt relief flood through him so intensely it made his hands shake. "Can you hear me?" he asked urgently, brushing snow from her face and checking for obvious injuries. Her eyes remained closed, and a nasty bruise was already forming on her temple. She had struck her head in the fall, which could mean anything from a mild concussion to something far worse. The woman moaned softly, but did not wake. Preston knew he had to get her out of this storm immediately. His cabin was less than 2 miles away, much closer than Bannack, and she needed warmth and shelter before hypothermia set in. He was already shrugging out of his heavy sheepskin coat as he made his decision. He wrapped his coat around her, then lifted her carefully from the snow. She was lighter than he expected, and he could feel her shivering even through her layers of clothing. That was good, he told himself. Shivering meant her body was still fighting the cold. He carried her to where Copper waited patiently, his breath steaming in the frigid air. Getting into the saddle while holding an unconscious woman was a challenge, but Preston had done harder things. He managed to mount and settle her across his lap, cradling her against his chest where his body heat might do her some good. Copper snorted and tossed his head, sensing his rider's urgency, then started down the mountain at a careful but steady pace. The ride back to the cabin seemed to take hours, though Preston knew it was less than 30 minutes. He talked to the woman the whole way, telling her she was going to be fine, that he would take care of her, that she just needed to hold on. He did not know if she could hear him, but the sound of his own voice was a comfort against the howling wind. His cabin appeared through the swirling snow like a blessing, solid and welcoming despite its humble appearance. Preston had built it himself 3 years ago, when he first decided to try his hand at trapping. It was small, just one room with a stone fireplace, but it was tight and warm and exactly what they needed right now. He dismounted awkwardly, still holding the woman, and kicked open the door. The interior was cold, the fire having died down to embers in his absence, but that was easily remedied. He carried her to his bed, a sturdy frame he had built from lodgepole pine with a thick mattress stuffed with pine needles and topped with furs and blankets. Preston laid her down gently and immediately set about building up the fire. Within minutes, he had flames leaping in the hearth, and he swung his kettle of water over them to heat. Only then did he turn his attention back to his patient. She was still unconscious, still shivering, and her wet clothes needed to come off before she froze. Preston hesitated, his sense of propriety warring with practical necessity, but there was no choice. He had to get her warm and dry. He worked quickly and respectfully, removing her soaked cloak, dress, and petticoats, averting his eyes as much as possible while still accomplishing the task. He left her chemise and drawers in place, then wrapped her in dry blankets and furs from his own bed. The bruise on her temple looked worse in the firelight, an angry purple spreading toward her hairline. Preston fetched a clean cloth and the now warm water, using it to gently clean the wound. There was no bleeding beyond a small cut, which he took as a good sign. He had seen enough head injuries during his time as a deputy to know that the real danger was what was happening inside where he could not see. He checked her over for other injuries, finding bruises on her shoulder and ribs where she must have struck the ground, but nothing that felt broken. Her breathing was steady, her pulse strong if a bit fast. All he could do now was keep her warm and wait for her to wake. Preston hung her wet clothes near the fire to dry, then set about making himself useful. He prepared a simple venison stew from meat he had stored, thinking she would need something hot and nourishing when she woke. If she woke. He pushed that dark thought away and focused on the practical tasks at hand. Night was falling by the time he heard her stir. Preston was sitting in his chair by the fire, mending a tear in one of his traps, when a soft sound from the bed made him look up. The woman's eyes were fluttering open, confusion evident in her expression as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. "Take it easy," Preston said, setting aside his work and moving to kneel beside the bed. "You were in an accident. You fell from a stagecoach." Her eyes focused on him with evident effort. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "My cabin, about 8 miles outside Bannack. I saw you fall and brought you here. You have been unconscious for several hours." She tried to sit up, then gasped and fell back against the pillows, one hand going to her head. "Everything hurts." "I imagine it does. You took quite a tumble. There is a nasty bruise on your temple and you are going to be sore for a few days, but I do not think anything is broken." He reached for a cup of water he had prepared and held it to her lips. "Try to drink a little." She drank gratefully, then looked down at herself, seeming to notice for the first time that she was in her undergarments beneath the blankets. A flush spread across her pale cheeks. "My clothes were soaked through. They are drying by the fire. I apologize for the impropriety, but it was necessary. You were freezing." She looked at him for a long moment, and Preston tried to imagine what she must be seeing. A stranger with several days' worth of beard, dressed in worn buckskin and wool, his dark hair in need of a trim. He probably looked like exactly the kind of rough mountain man that proper young ladies were warned about. "Thank you," she said finally, "for helping me. I thought I was going to die when I fell." "What is your name?" "Hannah Abbott. I was traveling to Bannack to join my uncle at his mining claim." "Preston Lawson. I am glad I happened to be checking my traps when your stage came through. Do you remember what happened? What caused the horses to bolt?" Hannah frowned, clearly trying to piece together her memories. "I do not know. We were just traveling along and then suddenly everything went wrong. The horses panicked, the coach was out of control, and then I hit the door and fell." She looked at him with sudden concern. "The other passengers, Mrs. Carmichael and Mr. Burgeon, are they all right?" Preston had been dreading that question. "I do not know. The coach was still running when I found you. I had to make a choice between trying to chase it down or helping you, and you were right here and hurt." "You made the right choice," Hannah said softly. "I hope they are all right, but there was nothing you could have done differently." They sat in silence for a moment, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Then Hannah spoke again. "How long was I unconscious?" "Several hours. It is full dark now. Do you feel sick to your stomach?" "Dizzy beyond what you would expect. My head aches terribly, but I do not feel sick. Are you a doctor?" "No, but I was a deputy for a while in Virginia City. I have seen my share of injuries." He stood and moved back to the fire. "I made some stew. Do you think you could eat?" Hannah considered this. "I think so. I am actually quite hungry." Preston ladled out a bowl of the thick stew and brought it to her, along with a spoon and a piece of bread he had baked 2 days before. Hannah struggled to sit up, wincing with pain, and he helped her, propping pillows behind her back until she was comfortable. She ate slowly, and Preston could see color returning to her cheeks as the hot food worked its magic. He had been more worried than he wanted to admit. Head injuries were unpredictable things, and there was still a chance she might take a turn for the worse in the night. But with each moment that passed and she remained lucid and responsive, his concern eased. "This is very good," Hannah said after she had eaten half the bowl. "You are a fine cook." "It is hard to ruin stew when you have enough time," Preston said with a slight smile. "How is your head?" "Still aching, but the food is helping. Everything is helping." She looked around the cabin with interest, taking in the rough-hewn log walls, the sturdy furniture, the furs and traps hanging from pegs, the shelves lined with supplies and tools. "Do you live here alone?" "I do. I trap and hunt, sell the furs in Bannack and Virginia City. It is a solitary life, but it suits me." "Why did you leave the law, if you do not mind my asking?" Preston was quiet for a moment, considering how much to share with this stranger who had literally fallen into his life. "I suppose I got tired of seeing the worst in people. Being a lawman means dealing with thieves and killers and claim jumpers. After a while it weighs on you. I wanted something simpler." Hannah nodded, seeming to understand. "I think I can appreciate that. I left everything I knew in Philadelphia to come out here. Sometimes starting over is the bravest thing you can do." "Philadelphia is a long way from Montana territory. What made you leave?" Her expression grew shadowed. "My parents died last year within months of each other. Father had a bad heart, and Mother just seemed to give up after he passed. I had no siblings, no close family except my Uncle Richard, who left for the gold fields years ago. I was working as a seamstress, barely making enough to keep my room, and when Uncle Richard wrote offering me a partnership in his claim, it seemed like Providence. I am sorry about your parents." "Thank you. It has been a difficult year. This trip was supposed to be a new beginning." She gestured ruefully at herself. "Though I did not anticipate beginning it by falling out of a stagecoach." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Preston found himself almost smiling. There was something resilient about this young woman, something that let her make light of her circumstances even while she was bruised and hurting and stranded in a stranger's cabin. "Well, you are alive. That is something." "Yes, it is." Hannah finished the rest of her stew and handed him the bowl. "Thank you again, Mr. Lawson, for everything. Preston is fine, and you are welcome. Try to rest now. I will keep the fire going and check on you through the night. If you feel worse or if you need anything, just call out." "Where will you sleep?" "I have furs and blankets. I will be comfortable enough by the fire." Hannah looked like she wanted to protest, but exhaustion was already pulling at her. Her eyelids drooped, and within minutes she was asleep again, her breathing deep and even. Preston settled himself in his chair and watched her sleep, his mind turning over the unexpected turn his day had taken. This morning he had been alone as usual, checking his traps and thinking about nothing more complicated than where to set his line next. Now he had an injured woman in his bed, a woman he was responsible for until she was well enough to continue to Bannack. He found himself studying her face in the firelight. She was pretty, with delicate features and honey-colored hair that had come loose from its pins and now spread across his pillow. There was something about her that intrigued him beyond the dramatic circumstances of their meeting. The way she had thanked him with genuine warmth despite being in a vulnerable position. The resilience he had glimpsed in her eyes. The fact that she had traveled across half the continent to start a new life on her own. Preston shook his head at himself. She was an injured woman under his protection, nothing more. Once she was well, he would take her to Bannack, and that would be the end of it. She would go to her uncle's claim, and he would return to his solitary existence. There was no point in letting his thoughts wander down paths that led nowhere. Still, as he kept his vigil through that long winter night, checking on her regularly and stoking the fire against the cold, Preston could not quite shake the feeling that something important had happened when Hannah Abbott fell into that snowdrift. Something that might change both their lives in ways he could not yet imagine. The storm continued through the night, wind howling around the cabin and snow piling up against the walls. Preston was glad he had found her when he did. Another hour in that cold and she might not have survived. As it was, morning found her still sleeping peacefully, her color much improved from the deathly pale she had been when he first pulled her from the drift. He prepared coffee and cornbread for breakfast, moving quietly so as not to wake her. She needed rest more than anything right now. While the coffee brewed, he went outside to tend to Copper and check the weather. The snow had stopped, leaving the world transformed into a pristine white wilderness. The temperature had dropped significantly, and Preston knew that even if Hannah was well enough to travel, which she was not, the roads would be impassable for at least a few days. They were snowed in together, like it or not. When he returned to the cabin, stamping snow from his boots, he found Hannah awake and struggling to sit up. He hurried to help her, noting with approval that she moved more easily than she had the night before. "Good morning," she said. "I was hoping I had not dreamed you and all this." "It is real enough. How are you feeling?" "Better. Still sore and my head still aches, but better. I am terribly thirsty, though." Preston poured her coffee and water and she drank both gratefully. Then he helped her eat some cornbread and preserves, pleased to see that her appetite remained strong. "I went outside earlier," he said. "The storm passed, but there must be 2 feet of fresh snow out there. The roads will be blocked for days." Hannah absorbed this news with equanimity. "Then I suppose I am imposing on your hospitality a while longer. I am sorry to be such a burden." "You are not a burden. I am just sorry the circumstances are not better." He hesitated, then continued. "There is a delicate matter we need to address. You have been in the same. Well, you need fresh clothes. I do not have anything suitable for a woman, but I have a clean shirt and some long underwear that might serve until your dress is dry enough to wear." Hannah blushed but nodded. "That would be helpful, thank you. And I should probably try to move around a little, if you do not mind helping me." Over the next hour, Preston helped Hannah get dressed in his oversized shirt and long underwear, discreetly turning his back while she changed behind a blanket he rigged up for privacy. Then he supported her as she took tentative steps around the cabin, testing her injured body. She was clearly in pain, but she was determined, and Preston found himself admiring her fortitude. "You are doing well," he said as she made her 3rd circuit of the small space. "But do not overdo it. Your body needs time to heal. I know, I just hate being helpless." She sank back onto the bed with obvious relief. "Though I am exhausted from just walking across the room, I suppose I am not as recovered as I thought. Give it time. You took a hard fall. You are lucky you did not break anything." They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. Preston cooked and tended the fire and went out periodically to check his traps and bring in firewood and fresh snow to melt for water. Hannah rested and slowly regained her strength, moving a little more each day. They talked to pass the long hours, sharing stories of their lives and dreams. Preston learned that Hannah had always wanted to see the West, that she had a gift for sewing and had once made a dress for the mayor's wife in Philadelphia. That she loved to read, but had been forced to sell most of her books to afford the Stagecoach ticket. That she had been frightened but excited about her new life in Montana, and that falling from the coach had been the most terrifying moment of her life. Hannah learned that Preston had been born in Missouri, that he had come west at 18 looking for adventure and found hard work instead. That he had once been engaged to a woman in Virginia City, but she had broken it off when she realized she could not handle the rough life of the frontier. that he loved these mountains and could not imagine living anywhere else, that he was 26 and had lived more life in those years than most men twice his age. By the third day, Hannah was moving around the cabin with relative ease, though she still tired quickly. Her bruises were fading from purple to yellow-green, and the cut on her temple was healing cleanly. Preston found himself increasingly aware of her presence, of the way she hummed softly while helping him prepare meals, of how the firelight caught gold highlights in her hair, of her quick laugh when he told her stories about his misadventures as a greenhorn deputy. He was falling for her. He knew it and could not seem to stop it. Every moment they spent together, every shared smile and conversation, wound her deeper into his heart. It was foolish and impractical and complicated, but it was happening nonetheless. On the fourth evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Hannah spoke the words that had been hanging between them. "The roads will be clear enough to travel soon. Yes, another day or two at most. I should get to Bannack. My uncle will be worried. He was expecting me days ago. I will take you as soon as you are strong enough and the way is passable." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "Preston, I need to tell you something. These past few days, being here with you, I have felt something I did not expect to feel. Something I am not sure I should be feeling." Preston's heart was suddenly hammering. "Hannah, please let me finish. I know this is improper and probably unwise, but I cannot leave without telling you. You saved my life. You have been nothing but kind and respectful, and somewhere in all of this, I have developed feelings for you. Real feelings." She turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the firelight. "I do not expect you to return them. I know I am just a woman who fell into your life by accident. But I wanted you to know." Preston crossed the small space between them in 2 strides and knelt before her chair. "You are not just a woman who fell into my life. You are the most remarkable person I have ever met. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and I have been half in love with you since the moment you woke up and thanked me with such grace, despite everything you had been through." "Preston," she whispered, and then his hands were cupping her face and he was kissing her with all the pent-up emotion of the past 4 days. She responded immediately, her fingers threading through his hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I do not want to take you to Bannack. I want to keep you here forever." "Then do not take me. Not yet. Let us have a few more days. I will send word to my uncle that I am safe, but please, I want more time with you." "Are you certain? What about your new life, your uncle's claim?" "My uncle will understand if I am delayed. And as for my new life, maybe it is here." She pulled back to look into his eyes. "Is that crazy? We have only known each other 4 days. If it is crazy, then I am crazy too, because I cannot imagine letting you go." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it. When they parted, Preston built up the fire and they spent the rest of the evening talking about the future, about possibilities, about what their life together might look like. It was too soon to make permanent promises. They both knew that, but the foundation was there, solid and real. Over the next week, as Hannah continued to recover and the weather cleared, they grew even closer. Preston taught her to shoot his rifle, standing behind her and guiding her aim, both of them laughing when she actually hit the target. Hannah taught him a card game she had learned in Philadelphia, and they played for matches by the fire. They cooked together, talked for hours, and shared increasingly passionate kisses that left them both wanting more but holding back out of respect for propriety and the newness of what they were building. Finally, 10 days after Hannah's fall, Preston decided it was time to take her to Bannack. Not because he wanted to let her go, but because she needed to see her uncle and make decisions about her future with all the information in front of her. If she chose to stay with Preston, he wanted it to be a clear choice, not something forced by circumstance. They rode into Bannack on a clear, cold morning, Hannah sitting in front of Preston on copper, bundled in her now dry dress and his spare coat. The town was larger than Preston's description had led her to expect, with several streets of buildings and quite a bit of activity, despite the winter season. Hannah's Uncle Richard turned out to be a weathered man in his 50s who ran a modest but profitable placer claim on Grasshopper Creek. When they found him at his cabin on the edge of town, his relief at seeing Hannah safe was palpable. He embraced her tightly, then turned to Preston with tears in his eyes. "Thank you for saving her. The stage came through 10 days ago all smashed up. They said a woman had fallen out in the mountains, but with the storm, nobody could go looking. I thought she was dead." He gripped Preston's hand hard. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You do not owe me anything, sir. I am just glad I was there when she needed help." Over coffee in Richard's snug cabin, they explained everything that had happened. Richard listened intently, his sharp eyes moving between Hannah and Preston, clearly noting the way they sat close together, the glances they exchanged, the connection that was obvious to anyone paying attention. When they finished, Richard leaned back in his chair and studied them both. "So what happens now?" Hannah took a deep breath. "Uncle Richard, I came here planning to work with you to build a new life in Montana. I still want that, but things have changed. I have feelings for Preston. Strong feelings. And I think he has feelings for me." "I do," Preston confirmed. "I know this is sudden and probably seems improper, but I love your niece, sir. I want to court her properly and see where this leads." Richard was quiet for a long moment, then he smiled. "Hannah, your mother was my sister and I loved her dearly. When she died, I promised myself I would look after you if you ever needed me. Now here you are, alive when you should be dead, and you have found a good man who loves you. I would be a fool to stand in the way of that. You are not disappointed. About the claim will be here whenever you want it, but love, real love that does not come along every day. If you have found it, you hold on to it." He looked at Preston. "You will take care of her, with my life, sir. Then you have my blessing to court her, though I expect you to do it properly. She can stay here with me and you can come calling like a gentleman." Preston smiled. "I would not have it any other way." Over the next 3 months, Preston courted Hannah in the traditional fashion. He came to town twice a week, bringing game for Richard's table and flowers he had somehow coaxed to grow in his cabin despite the winter cold. He took Hannah on chaperoned walks through Bannack, showing her the sights. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting with Richard in the small log building that served as the town's house of worship. Hannah worked with her uncle at his claim during the warmer days, learning the trade and proving herself to be a quick study and hard worker. She also took in sewing, her reputation for fine work spreading quickly through the small community. She made friends with other women in town, particularly Emma Chen, whose husband ran the general store, and Sarah McConnell, a widow who ran a boarding house. But it was the hours she spent with Preston that Hannah treasured most. They talked about everything under the sun, learning each other's minds and hearts. They discovered they shared similar values about honesty and hard work, and the importance of building something lasting. They disagreed about small things, like whether coffee should be strong enough to float a horseshoe, Preston's view, or merely robust, Hannah's preference, and found they could navigate disagreements with respect and even humor. By early March, when the first hints of spring were beginning to show in the greening willows along the creek, Preston knew it was time. He spoke to Richard first, asking formally for permission to marry Hannah. Richard gave it gladly, and then Preston arranged something special. He invited Hannah out to his cabin for a day, properly chaperoned by Emma Chen, ostensibly to help him with some sewing repairs. But when they arrived, Hannah found the cabin transformed. Preston had cleaned every inch, brought in fresh pine boughs for scent and decoration, and prepared a feast by his standards: venison roast and vegetables, and even a dried apple pie he had traded for in town. After they ate and Emma had diplomatically gone outside to admire the view, Preston took Hannah's hands in his. "These past 3 months have been the best of my life. You have brought light and joy and purpose to days that used to be just about survival. I cannot imagine my future without you in it." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a ring he had commissioned from the town's blacksmith, a simple gold band with a small mountain sapphire. "Hannah Abbott, will you marry me?" Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes. Yes, of course I will marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger and stood to kiss her, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. Emma, watching from the doorway, was dabbing at her own eyes. They were married 6 weeks later in Bannack's church, on a beautiful April morning when the mountains were green with new growth and wildflowers dotted the meadows. Hannah wore a dress she had made herself, simple but elegant white cotton with delicate embroidery. Preston wore new clothes purchased for the occasion, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in anything other than his usual buckskin and wool. Richard walked Hannah down the short aisle, and half the town turned out to witness the ceremony. The young minister who served Bannack's congregation spoke about the providence that had brought Hannah and Preston together, about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the greatest blessings. When Preston said, "I do," his voice was strong and sure. When Hannah spoke the same words, she was looking into his eyes with such love that several people in the audience were moved to tears. The reception was held at Sarah McConnell's boarding house, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Hannah danced with Preston, then with her uncle, then with various townsmen, while Preston looked on with a mixture of pride and barely concealed impatience to have her to himself. Finally, as the sun was setting and the party was winding down, they said their goodbyes and rode out to Preston's cabin, which was now their cabin. Preston had spent weeks fixing it up, adding shelves and a proper wardrobe for Hannah's things, building a larger bed, installing glass windows he had freighted in from Helena. It was still modest, but it was home. That night they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, discovering each other with joy and wonder. Afterward, lying in each other's arms while the fire crackled and the night sounds of the forest filtered through the windows, Hannah spoke softly. "Do you ever think about that day? When I fell from the stage, every day, it was the luckiest moment of my life. I thought I was going to die, and now look at me. I am married to the man I love, starting the life I was meant to live. It is like I had to fall to find where I belonged." Preston kissed her forehead. "You belong here, with me, always." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The cabin was isolated and winter was hard. Hannah learned to handle the solitude, but there were days when she missed the social connection of town. Preston worried about money, about providing enough, about whether this life was too rough for his cultured wife from Philadelphia. But they talked through their concerns, supported each other, and found solutions together. They decided Preston would continue trapping through winter, but would hire on as a guide for hunting parties and mining expeditions in summer, which would bring in more money and give Hannah opportunities to go along and meet new people. Hannah's sewing business continued to grow, with women from as far away as Virginia City sending her commissions. Uncle Richard remained a steady presence in their lives, joining them for Sunday dinners and holidays. He taught Preston more about mining, and the two men became close friends. Richard admitted to Hannah that he had worried she would be lonely in Montana, but seeing her with Preston, seeing how they had built a partnership based on love and mutual respect, put his mind at ease. In the spring of their second year together, Hannah realized she was pregnant. She was excited and terrified in equal measure, and Preston was much the same. They made plans, preparing the cabin for a baby, saving every penny they could. Emma Chen and Sarah McConnell became invaluable sources of advice and support, having been through childbirth themselves. On a snowy December night in 1877, 2 years and 2 weeks after Hannah had fallen from that stagecoach, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Preston was there for the whole thing, holding her hand through the long labor, his own face nearly as pale as hers by the time their son finally arrived. They named him Thomas Richard Lawson, after Hannah's father and her uncle. Holding his son for the first time, Preston felt a love so intense it was almost painful. He looked at Hannah, exhausted but radiant in the lamplight, and felt such gratitude he could barely speak. "Thank you," he finally managed. "For him, for this life, for everything. We made him together," Hannah said softly, "just like we are building this life together." Thomas was a healthy, happy baby who quickly became the center of their world. Hannah discovered she loved being a mother, and Preston was surprised by how natural fatherhood felt. He would carry Thomas around the cabin in a sling Hannah made, talking to the baby about traps and trees and tracking while Hannah worked on her sewing commissions. Uncle Richard was besotted with his great-nephew, and visited even more frequently, bearing gifts and offering to babysit whenever Hannah and Preston needed time alone. The community of Bannack embraced the small family, and Hannah found herself with more friends and social connections than she had ever had in Philadelphia. When Thomas was 2, Hannah became pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, knowing what to expect. Their daughter, Catherine Ann Lawson, arrived in the spring of 1880, a tiny thing with her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's dark eyes. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister and insisted on helping care for her, bringing her toys and blankets and watching over her with serious attention. Preston was doing well financially by this point. His reputation as a guide was established, and he had steady work most of the year. Hannah's sewing business had evolved into something more substantial, with her employing 2 younger women from town to help fulfill orders. They had saved enough money to add a second room to the cabin, giving the children their own space. Life was good. Not easy, the frontier never allowed for easy but good. Rich with love and purpose and the satisfaction of building something together. When Thomas was 6 and Catherine was 4, Hannah and Preston made a decision that had been percolating for a while. They would move into Bannack proper. The isolation had been romantic when they were newlyweds, but with children needing education and socialization, it made sense to be in town. Preston could still guide and trap, and Hannah's business would benefit from the accessibility. They bought a small house on the main street with a garden plot and room for Preston's horse. It was a big change, but a good one. Thomas started school and proved to be bright and curious. Catherine made friends with every child in town, her sunny personality winning hearts everywhere. Uncle Richard's health began to decline when Hannah was 30. He had been a vital, energetic man, but age and hard years of mining were catching up with him. He spent more time at Hannah and Preston's house, and they cared for him with love and dedication. He died peacefully in his sleep at age 63, with Hannah holding his hand. His death was hard for Hannah, losing the last connection to her childhood. But she had Preston and the children, and she had built a community around herself. Richard's will left everything to Hannah, including his mining claim, which she and Preston decided to sell to a young couple just starting out, passing on the opportunity that Richard had once offered her. The years continued to pass, marked by small joys and occasional sorrows. Thomas grew into a serious young man who showed talent for drawing and surveying. Catherine was all light and laughter, creative and social. Preston's hair started to show gray at the temples, and Hannah's face gained the lines of a woman who smiled often. They grew older together, their love deepening with time rather than fading. When Montana gained statehood in 1889, there was a huge celebration in Bannack. The town had declined somewhat from its gold rush days, many people moving to newer strikes, but it remained a tight-knit community. Preston and Hannah stood with their children, now young adults, and watched the fireworks and felt the weight of history. They had been part of building this place, part of its story. Thomas married a teacher from Helena when he was 22, and they settled in Bannack, where Thomas worked as a surveyor. Catherine married a rancher's son at 20 and moved to a spread east of town, but visited often with her growing family. Preston and Hannah became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family tree spread and flourish. On quiet evenings, sitting on their porch in Bannack, Preston would sometimes take Hannah's hand and they would remember that day in the snow. How a terrible accident had become the best thing that ever happened to either of them. How a fall had led to finding each other. "You have any regrets?" Preston asked her once, when they were both well into their 50s. Hannah looked at him with eyes that still held the warmth and spirit he had first seen in his cabin all those years ago. Not a single one. Every moment, good and bad, led to this, to us. They lived long lives, Preston passing at 78 and Hannah following 3 years later at 76. Their love story complete, but echoing through the generations they left behind. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would tell the story of how they met, of the woman who fell from a stagecoach into the snow and the cowboy who rode to help, of a love that built a family and helped build Montana itself. The old cabin where Hannah had recovered, where they had fallen in love, still stood in the mountains outside Bannack. Their descendants would sometimes hike out to see it, to touch the walls Preston built, to stand in the place where two lives had intertwined and created something beautiful and lasting. And on winter nights, when the snow fell soft and thick over Montana, people would tell the story of Hannah and Preston, reminding their children that sometimes the worst moments contain the seeds of our greatest joy, and that true love, when you find it, is worth holding on to with everything you have. Their legacy was not just in the family they created, or the business they built, or the community they served. It was in the example they set of partnership, of facing life's challenges together, of choosing love every day even when it was difficult. They had shown that people from different worlds could find common ground, that accidents could become blessings, that a moment of crisis could be the beginning of something wonderful. In the cemetery on the hill above Bannack, 2 headstones stood side by side, the inscriptions simple but telling. Preston Lawson, beloved husband, father, and friend. Hannah Abbott Lawson, beloved wife, mother, and friend. And beneath their names, words Preston had chosen years before, drawn from a conversation on that first night in the cabin. Every moment led to this. It was a truth they had lived every day of their marriage. Every choice, every challenge, every moment of joy and sorrow had been part of the tapestry they wove together. From that snowy December day in 1875, when Hannah fell and Preston rode to help, through decades of building a life and raising a family and growing old together, they had lived fully and loved completely. Their story became part of Bannack's history, told and retold, a testament to the power of chance and choice, of courage and commitment. Young people would ask the old-timers about them, and the stories would flow. About how Preston had saved Hannah's life. About how they had fallen in love in a remote cabin while the snow fell outside. About how they had built something lasting in a place that was still wild and new. And always, the story would end the same way. With the reminder that Hannah and Preston had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind not just descendants but a legacy of what it means to commit to another person, to build a life together through good times and hard times, to choose love and partnership every single day. The house they had lived in on Bannack's Main Street was still standing well into the next century, occupied by their great-great-grandchildren, still filled with love and laughter, and the spirit of family that Hannah and Preston had nurtured. The wild mountains Preston had trapped and guided through still stood eternal, and sometimes their descendants would ride out into them and feel close to the couple who had started it all. In every way that mattered, Hannah and Preston's love story had a happy ending. Not because their lives were perfect or easy, but because they had found each other, chosen each other, and built something real and lasting together. They had taken a terrible accident and transformed it into the foundation of a beautiful life. They had fallen in love in the most unlikely of circumstances, and made that love last through decades of change and challenge. And in the end, that is all any love story needs to be complete. Two people who find each other, commit to each other, and build a life together filled with love and purpose, and the courage to face whatever comes. Hannah and Preston had done exactly that, and their legacy would live on in the hearts and lives of everyone they touched. The mountains remembered them. The town remembered them. But most of all, their family remembered them, passing down the story from generation to generation, a reminder that sometimes you have to fall before you can fly, and that the person who helps you up might just be the love of your life. That was the story of Hannah Abbott and Preston Lawson, the woman who fell from a moving stagecoach into the snow, and the cowboy who saw it and rode to help. It was a story of rescue and recovery, of unexpected love and deliberate choice, of building a life together in the wild beauty of Montana territory. And it was a story with a happy ending, complete and satisfying, with all threads tied up and all promises kept. They had lived well, loved well, and left behind a legacy that would endure long after the mountains themselves crumbled to dust. Their story was complete, their journey together finished, but the love they shared would echo through time, inspiring others to take chances, to open their hearts, and to believe that sometimes the worst day of your life can become the first day of your best life, if you are brave enough to embrace it.